Beautiful. So we're in the four Gospels tonight. Matthew, do you know the names? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And we have Brian here tonight with us. What an honor. We have Brian. So we're going to look at those and compare them a little bit. And so, well, let's start. All right. So whenever, we look at the Bible, we want to know context. So I'm going to write down some words that you should know and think about. So, geography. Where in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, where is all of this history happening? Where is it occurring? Where is it in the map? Topography. How tall, when it says Sermon on the Mount, how tall is the mount? When it says Sea of Galilee, is it really a sea? Or is it a lake? And how big is the lake, right? It's important to have perspective regarding this piece of land. And how far did Jesus travel in his lifetime? What do you think is the longest distance from one place to the other? Do you know? 200 miles. Yeah. From the north down to the wilderness in Judea. So was he ever in Caesarea? Was he in Tyre, what today's Lebanon? Yes. Where did he go first when he started his ministry? How old was he? And how far did he walk? Where was his headquarters? When did he go to Judea? Was his ministry mostly in Galilee? Where is Galilee? And what is the topography, the mountains, the hills, and the low points and the high points, and the distances between places. So this is an important part of our study, because if you read the Gospels, it can become a little bit abstract, that you don't really know the context, historical. Let's go to the society of the time. You have leaders and governments, and let's write down a few names we know. Ananias, do you know who he was? He was the high priest, or the father-in-law to the high priest, who was Caiaphas, who was the guy calling the shots at the end of Christ's life. But both of them went together. They were relatives, but they had an enormous amount of power and authority over what governing body? Sanhedrin. Who was the Sanhedrin? They were the 70 elders. Where did that come from in the Bible? That was from Numbers 11 with Moses, when there were 70 that prophesied. When Moses was the leader in the camp, there were 70 that prophesied, and that became a tradition eventually in the history of the Jewish people. And the history is like long history about the Jewish people and the traditions and the teachings. Another one is the Romans. Give me some names that you remember reading in the Gospels. The Romans, who are they? Give me the name of somebody. What? Pilate? Agrippa? Okay, he came a little later. He's not in the Gospels, but we have Herod the Tetrarch. What is a Tetrarch? Who was Herod the Great when Jesus was born? And who was he? He did incredible things in architecture and building in Caesarea, Masada, aqueducts, roads. Like Herod the Great was an incredible builder, but a very evil man, because he murdered his sons and I don't know how many wives, but he was he was a paranoid tyrant, so he controlled his group by removing anybody that seemed to be a threat. And that Herod family is a famous family, and you can read it, pick it up in the Gospels. How did the Romans differ from the Sanhedrin, the Jewish government? The Jewish government, what was one major difference between the Jews and the Romans? The Jews were monotheistic. They believed in one God. Romans were pagans. They believed in basically 12 gods. And they got those from the Greeks who had their gods. We mentioned some of them in service yesterday. Aphrodite and Bacchus and so on. How many of you were in church service yesterday here at Greater Grace? How many were in? Okay, all right, that's great. Okay, just curious, because the Bible school and the the services, they go together, and you're learning, always picking up things. So the Jews were also, did the Jews have a king? Well, let me say something about this. What? Didn't they have Jesus? That's a good answer. Yeah, wait a minute. Didn't they have Jesus? Wasn't he the king of the Jews? Yeah. Okay. So, all right. This is a bad picture of Europe. And, yeah, it's Europe. Okay. Israel, the Jordan River, Dead Sea. Now, this territory, Israel, through history, up to the time of the Gospels, this was a province for the Roman Empire. Roman Empire is about 75 million people, okay? And the Jews are about 3 million people. Now, how do we know the Jews are about 3 million people? Because Josephus, a Jewish historian, said that one Passover, 150,000 lambs were slaughtered at the Passover. And that happened here in Jerusalem. So from that, they estimate how many people lived in Israel. And it was divided up by governors and leaders and ruled over by Rome. So Rome is here, and they look at the Jews as kind of a problem. They looked at the Jews as kind of, well, their history, they are rebellious. They have been conquered by the Babylonians. They come back, rebuild. They are then conquered. Babylonians, we have Persians. That's the Persians are not having a problem with the Jews. Okay, Persians are way over here in that direction, way over towards Iraq. Today's Iraq in Iran. So Persians are not, but the Greeks, they didn't like the Jews. Okay, and the Greeks, what you would say, were secular. They were pagans, but they also had a lot of philosophy. You know, Plato, Socrates. They had a way of looking at life. They're trying to figure life out, and it was a dominant philosophical system. And when the Jews were, let's say they migrated, they lived over here in Alexandria, Egypt, they would learn like not monotheistic Judaism, but they would learn Hellenistic philosophy or Greek philosophy. So that was happening at the time of Jesus. There was, and actually, to be honest, today you have we have the Reformed Jews. How many know this? Reformed Jews. Anybody? You know how in the Christianity we have Catholics and Protestants, and then in the Protestants we have the liberal theologians and neo-Orthodox, and then conservative or fundamental. Well, in Judaism today, it's the same. It's Reformed is the liberal. You don't even have to believe in God, but you're a Reformed Jew. You're a Jew, but you may go to the synagogue, but it's very liberal. You can believe any number of things. Number two, conservative Jew, conservative, and then number three, Orthodox Jew. Okay, my handwriting's not good, I know, but. Do you know how teachers are different and teachers that can be organized like Pastor Michael Toll? He'd have a perfect picture, perfect text, lists, photos, the whole thing. Look at me. Nothing. Illegible. Can't even read it. Nothing. No picture, nothing. Nothing off the internet, nothing. Look at that. Well, we use what we got. Okay, so yeah.
So, conservative Jew is self-explanatory. What do you mean when you say Orthodox? Like, what's their more?
They're very much submitted to the literal meaning of the Bible, the literal teaching of the Bible, and they have the literal. Let me explain something. It's a very good question because it relates to Sadducees. What is a Sadducee? They are a liberal Jew at the time of Jesus. They didn't believe in spirits, they didn't believe in angels, and they didn't believe in the resurrection. But the Pharisees, they came about the 3rd century BC. It's a sect that believes in the literal word, the letter of the word, the letter, and they're very devout toward it. And then from the Pharisees came, and their teaching came, the commentary on the law, which is called the tradition. By your traditions, Jesus said, you live by your traditions. So you have traditions. And here we'll put here the Bible, and the Pharisees had the Bible, but they also had their tradition. And when it came to something difficult, they held to the tradition instead of to the Bible. Let's turn to one part there. Let's go to Matthew 15. All this is to say that if we read the Gospels and we kind of learn about the context, it helps us to read and understand it. But we are not yet there. So Matthew 15. Verse 1. Then came to Jesus scribes and Pharisees which were of Jerusalem, saying, Why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they wash not their hands when they eat bread. Now watch verse 3. But he answered and said, Why do you also transgress the commandment of God by your tradition? Let's look at this for a second. You have the Bible. He is calling it the commandment of God, the Bible. And then you have tradition. And the tradition can use the Bible, but they can kind of add to the Bible. Like by tradition of our fathers, they were taught in the Talmud, this is the Torah. The Torah is the law, and then the Talmud is comment on the law. And it's complicated to live by the law. Let me give an example. And I know I'm getting off, but no, this is all good, but okay. You should not work on the Sabbath. Okay, you should not work on the Sabbath. You should not carry any heavy burden on the Sabbath. You should not work on the Sabbath. Now, explain to me what work is. What's work? Well, if I have a big box and I pick up that box and I carry it, 100 meters away, that's work. You shouldn't do that on the Sabbath. But what if in the box is my son, and my son needs to be carried to the hospital or to the doctor? Can I do that on the Sabbath? No, you can't do that on the Sabbath. Then what will happen to my son if he needs me? Or if I carry a burden, can I carry a false tooth on the Sabbath? No, that's a burden. So now you have a problem. Like on the Sabbath, I can't carry a burden or do any work. They even had in the Talmud, it was like 25 volumes, chapters explaining what work is. If you had sandals and you had nails coming through, you couldn't wear those on the Sabbath because you would be plowing the ground with the nails that are in your shoe. So do you realize that it's a problem to figure out? Like you look at the Torah says don't work on the Sabbath. Now the Talmud has to explain what that means. When somebody asks, can I carry my child on the Sabbath? Yeah. So look at the text again. Verse 3. But he answered, you do also transgress the commandment of God by your tradition. For God commanded, saying, honor your father and mother, and he that curses father and mother, let him die the death. He has to be stoned. Who's going to stone their son or their daughter? You can't. How are you going to do that? He's rebellious. My child is rebellious. Well, the law says stone them. And the rabbis will say, we can't stone our children. So Jesus is saying, you invent something to excuse the law when the law says to stone the child because he's rebellious. Now notice something. The law was given to show us these problems. The law was given. So what did Jesus say about the rebellious child? He told a parable. There was a man who demanded his inheritance. He went and he lived with the pigs and he slept around and he lived like that. Well, what does the law say? Stone him. What did Jesus say? The father ran out to meet him, killed the fatted calf. Why? Because the meaning of the law is love. But it's actually two-sided. It shows the severity of God, but it's also finding the heart is the heart of mercy, heart of love. But it's not clear if you have only the Torah. But actually in the Torah there is a lot of love. Another thing he said that Jesus to challenge these people, because watch in our little thing here. Well, let's write it here. The Sadducees, and then the Pharisees, both of them, Jesus said, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He said, beware of the leaven, and that's yeast that infects. It infects a lump of dough. Yeast are like little microscopic plants that produce gas. They're like living. You mix it in the dough, and the dough rises from the gas. And he's saying both groups will infect your doctrine, and you'll miss the mind of God. If you live strictly by the law, you can miss the mind of God and become very hard. And if you go by the Sadducees, you become very liberal, and you'll miss the essence of God by your liberal way of thinking and living. Okay? What's the point here? The Gospels are written in a context, and for us to kind of get a hold of some of these abstract ideas will help us read it. Okay? I'm going kind of fast, I know, but here, where am I? Let's go to, we had geography, topography, we have society, we have religion. The Jews, the Romans and the Jews. The Romans looked at the Jews as a problem because they do have a history of rebellion, and the mentalities are different. The Romans were pagans with many gods. The Jews were with one God and very loyal to him, but they lost the king. They had no other king but Caesar, because the Romans were tolerating all the varieties of the cultures. They tolerated in their empire whatever god you are worshiping, it's okay. Like, we just don't cause trouble. Like, they're governing like in a secular way, and they're just tolerating differences and wanting the empire to get along with trade, control. It's an empire. You have armies, you have travel, you have business, and so on. And the Jews are kind of tucked away and not that powerful economically. But their location is very good because it's at the center and from the east and west, And so the Romans were very concerned that the Jews would be behaving and subject to their empire. But in the Bible, and this is something the Romans didn't know, just like today, the secular world doesn't know this, that way back here, there are the Jewish people, and they are actually part of a kingdom that was built by David and then Solomon. And this kingdom actually has a promise that David would have, that his son would sit on a throne forever and ever. It's the promise of the Messiah. So when the Babylonians came, they cut off the king, like that's the end. So the king was visible, let's put it this way, he's visible, he's a king, and put a crown on him. But when they cut it off, the genealogy continues, but it's underground for like hundreds. It's still underground. It's still no, well, there isn't any, because it's Christ. So when you read the genealogy in the Gospel of Luke and Matthew, you see two lines, and they are actually Joseph. Joseph is of the line of David, and he is not the father of Christ biologically, but he's the father of Christ legally. And then his mother, Jesus' mother, is also of the line, but a different line, but from David. But these two lines, they are put together, and the angel told Mary that she would have a son. And those two genealogies, one is of Joseph, one is of Mary, is a proof that this little boy that was born of Mary is the seed of David. And he is servicing in the gospel. And on the cross, Pilate said that he is the king of the Jews. And he actually was. And the Jews at the time, they didn't like it. They said, no, say that he said, I am the king of the Jews. And Pilate was finished with them at that point. What I said is what I said. What is written is what is written. And it was like perfect. Yeah. Okay, so Romans, Jews, and then let's go to another thing that's important to know. Israel goes like this, as far as the map goes. And there's the lake, there's the Jordan River, there's the Dead Sea. Up here in the north is, remember in our prophets class, we're talking about the Assyrians coming down, taking the 10 tribes into captivity, and then then other people move in, and they mix with whatever Jews are still there, and they become another group of people called Samaritans. So the Samaritans, because they are, the predominant city is like here, Samaria. And the people that ended up coming back in were not clean Orthodox Jews, meaning Mom and Dad and my grandparents are not Jewish, but actually they're a mix of Persian or, other people groups, Mesopotamian peoples, Hittites, maybe Egyptian. They come back in, and so this is a part of Israel that Jesus lives in. He lives, he chooses, God chooses to put him in the north. And that's important in the prophet Isaiah when he says let's flip over to Isaiah. And this is a beautiful thing about the Gospels, is that you can find in the Old Testament like a lot of Bible prophecy that is so important for the Jew. Look at chapter 9, isn't it? Yeah, verse 1. Isaiah 9. Nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in her vexation when at the first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. Where are they? What are they? Tribes in the north, yeah. They're up here. Asher is along the sea. Naphtali, Nebulun. I'm not good at telling you exactly where they are, especially with my map. I don't know. I just know they're in the north, because it says that too. It says, they will, it says, beyond Jordan, and by the way of the sea, beyond Jordan, in Galilee of the nations, the people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined. This is what the commentaries are. This is what your Bible will say. That light that shines in the north is Christ. All right, so he is here somewhere in a little town called Nazareth, for he shall be called a Nazarene. But where was he born? Down here here's Jerusalem, and right outside of Jerusalem is Bethlehem, about 5 miles south is Bethlehem. He was born in Bethlehem. Why? That's where David is from. David was born in Bethlehem. David is from Bethlehem. David became the great king. But this is a king that has a ministry that is born in Bethlehem. His family goes to Egypt. They come out of Egypt by a dream and told to go to Nazareth. So now he's in the north here, and this is where he starts his ministry. Up here, the north end of the Sea of Galilee is Capernaum, and Capernaum becomes his headquarters. Now, you can go to Israel and walk in these ways. You might want to do it. I've been thinking about it myself. I'd like to walk where Jesus walked through those hills. That'd be fun. I mean, I've been there in Israel many times, and I'm familiar a little bit with some of this, and it helps me as a teacher. And you might like it. I mean, I know you would love it. I mean, it's fascinating to be there and to see it, you know. Okay, so how did it work in the Gospels? Well, the first part, this is called Judea, okay? And this is the Orthodox part of Israel. Orthodox. That means the Pharisees, the temple, the sacrifices, the teaching, all of that is very strong there. And they look like with pride towards the rest of the country. Like, oh, those people in the north, they are, and they don't think of them. But there are synagogues around in the places, and this is where Jesus went. Way up here, there's a place that's Dan, the tribe of Dan. I lost it. Okay, yeah, for some reason. Okay, Dan is up way up to the north there. And there was pagan temples up there. There was the temple of the wild goats, or the dancing goats, okay? The temple of the dancing goats. I'll show you something. Okay. Okay, so how did it go when Jesus started? He was in Judea. This is in the Gospel of John. Gospel of John has text that's not in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And actually, let's go over that for a moment here. We got Matthew. Jesus is seen as a king because the Gospel of Matthew is written primarily to the Jews. The Gospel of Mark, he is an ox. Matthew, Mark, Luke. So he's an ox written to Gentiles. And the key word there is straight way. He's working. Matthew is about Bible prophecy and teaching regarding the Messiah being a king. The Gospel of Mark is him working hard, not a lot of teaching, but a lot of miracles. The Gospel of Luke, he is a man, and the humanity and certain things about weakness and about prayer. I love the Gospel of Luke like in that way. And there are certain things in the Gospel of Luke that are not in the other Gospels. You can read in the back of your Thompson chain. If you are, you want to filter through what was written in Mark that was not written in Luke. What was written in John that was not written in, and there was quite a bit. John is very unique. So here he's seen as a man. In the Gospel of John, he is seen as an eagle. Now, where is this coming from? It's a profile. Eagle is perspective. I'll explain it a little bit more. Turn to Revelation 4. So we have verse 7, Revelation 4:7. We have four creatures. The first beast was like a lion, so that's the Gospel of Matthew. If you make a correlation between this verse, Revelation 4:7, and the four Gospels, it kind of makes sense. The second beast is like a calf. That's the working domestic animal. The third beast had a face as a man. That's like us. The fourth beast was like a flying eagle. What's the meaning of these? Lion, a king, and a calf or ox, a working domestic animal, a calf. The man, we see Christ as a man, of course, and then eagle is the eyes of an eagle, like can see specifically in detail from far away and from far up in the sky. Now notice Gospel of John. Turn there with me and make a comparison in John chapter 1. Where is Jesus? John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. Verse 14, the Word was made flesh, dwelt among us. Where's the genealogy? There isn't any genealogy in John. He just says he is God and he became flesh. And then at the end of John, the end in chapter 21, with verse 23, 24, 25. Where is the ascension into heaven? When does he go to heaven, into heaven, in the Gospel of John? He doesn't. It doesn't say that he went up to heaven. Why not? Because he's an eagle. That he is God and he was in heaven, and all through the Gospel of John. Look at John 3:13. He's the I am. 3:13 says, no man has ascended up to heaven, but he that came down from heaven, even the Son of Man, which is in heaven. He's in heaven. What's an eagle? He's in the sky. Yeah. See, so the uniqueness of the Gospel of John by many, many ways, but one of them is, and when we go back to the map here, he starts here in the Gospel of John, in John chapter 3, he meets Nicodemus. He is in Judea. Then he goes up from Jerusalem up to Samaria. He meets the woman at the well. And then let's see, in John 5, he's back in Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem is a dangerous place for Jesus. It's where he meets his enemies. It's a dangerous place because they are starting to recognize that he's a threat and that the people are interested in listening to him. So in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we're not in Judea until the end of those Gospels. But in John, we're in Judea in the beginning. And then he goes up here after in John, and he is ministering. And then, but most of the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke are up here. And then he comes down. And when he comes down, the disciples are afraid. They're afraid to go to Jerusalem. Don't go to Jerusalem. That's a dangerous place. But he does, because that's why he came. Okay, so let's go to another thing. Let's put down a few things at the end here. Money, like what kind of money did they have? We have this word talent. We have measures that you learn about. Like this is for context. We mentioned distances. How long does it take to walk from Judea up to Galilee? Is it done in a couple of days, 3 days, 5 days, something like that? If you go, another one is, why would they go to Jerusalem? Because there are Jews that were told in the law to go to the feasts. And there were 3 of them that normally they would go to. Now, going on to a feast in Jerusalem, like the Passover, was a big project, the whole family. And you got to bring food, and you walk down. It's a week of walking. You're there for the feast. That's a week or so, and then you walk back home. That's a lot. That's a lot. But in the ancient world, of course, it was slow. Like you, of course, walking and 3 weeks and being together and so on. And you remember when he was 12 years old, his family had come down with him. And when they were in the family, the bigger family group, Mom and Dad assumed Jesus was with the family. Then after a day walking, they go, where is he? And the family is saying, he's not with us, he's not with us, he's not with us. Well, where is he? They returned looking for him. And they started to look, and where was the last place they looked? At the temple. At the temple. And they look for him a couple of days. They're looking for him. And then they find him and they go, you made us sorrowful. What did you do? Why did you do this to us? We have been looking for you sorrowing. Like, what are you doing? And that parent easily could say, do you know what you have done? Do you know what you have done? And he said, I must be about my Father's business. So they're on a learning curve. But you can see how the story kind of comes alive and makes sense if we know distances and, a little bit about the culture and what's going on. Yeah. Another one, the feasts. I'll just put down a couple of them here. We got the key one is the Passover in the spring. Then you have the next one is the Pentecost or the Feast of Harvest, the harvest. Next one you have the Tabernacles. And about that time you have the Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, the New Year. And there's a few more feasts. There's a Feast of Dedication for the Temple in December, and then Purim in the spring from the time of the book of Esther. Another one is agriculture that you'd like to know. Climate. What's the climate like in Israel? And also agriculture. What kind of plants grow? How do they grow? And it's a very good climate, actually. Israel is a good climate. It's like Mediterranean. You have the sea there. You have water. In the Middle East, that's a big thing. You have water, you have fresh water, and it's a desirable place. And a lot of wars and contests have been around that area. So when Jesus comes, it's like there's the real light, the normal life, and then when Jesus comes in, there's like so many things that are like catch your attention, because he's there to show himself to be the Messiah. And that was in their tradition. The Messiah would raise the dead. Well, let's put this down. The rabbis believed that the Messiah would be able to raise the dead, cleanse a leper. This is in their tradition, and you can find some scripture. Raise the dead, heal the blind, and also the deaf. And you can compare. Isaiah 35 is one that I know where they get this from. The leper isn't in that text, and I don't think the raising the dead is either. But that's what he did. And I believe the rabbis had those conditions for the Messiah. If he's really the Messiah, he could do these things. And this is what he did. Okay? So I did a lot of talking, and I hope it helped. I mean, we got to cover. I think I'll give you a handout next class. We have another class on the Gospels. But that helps, isn't it? I wonder if I missed anything here that I wanted to make. Let's see, we have politics, climate, social things. I think health is a big thing. What was the average age span of people? Also women, you have men. Women in the Roman Empire were very poorly treated. Women were very poorly treated in the pagan world, in the ancient world. Women could be killed, women could be divorced, women could be mistreated easily. Children also. Children could be killed if they're a burden to the family. In the pagan ancient world, we assume in our culture that people would be like us, but no. Like men and then the women had many disadvantages. But in Judaism, there was a belief in God, and that God was merciful. And that was different. Like God is merciful, and that God is love. And you can find it in the prophets. You know, remember the book of Hosea? Like, go marry a woman who is a prostitute, and he does. And then she leaves him, and she becomes a slave for some man. And she is his sex slave, and she is his slave, and then God says to Hosea, go buy her back and bring her back as your wife. Okay, those kind of things. The book of Ruth, the story of Deborah, Miriam. And so when Jesus came and he honored women, and many women followed him, Luke chapter 8, verses 2 and 3, women followed him. They were at his cross, and they're the first ones to know that he's been raised from the dead. And then children also brought into his presence and honored. All right, so the gospel should be seen in the context of the time, and that will help us read it with a lot of interest. Amen. Okay. That's it. God bless you. Amen. Yes. Sure.
It's about the intended audiences, because you skipped the last two. Matthew's written to the Jews, Mark's is written to the Romans.
No,
Luke, right?
yeah, the Greeks.
Mark is written to the Greeks?
Mark, no, yeah, the Greek, no, Mark is Romans, Luke is the Greeks. And then Theophilus, wait a minute, Luke wrote it to Theophilus, and it's Greek, because Luke was Greek, and he wrote in very good Greek language, and he had the Greek mind, and he had detail and the humanity. Remember how Greeks have like their sculptures of like men, like they had a humanistic thing about men, about people. And so the Greek mind was being addressed by the Gospel of Luke. And then John is universal. Yeah. Okay, good question. I didn't cover that. Okay. God bless you guys. Just keep reading. I mean, you got a lot to read. Just keep reading, and it will point some things out to you in the next class, comparing. Yeah. If you have a Thompson Chain Bible, this is the one that I've been using like a lot. But if you want to look up the Gospels at the back and make comparisons, what parables were spoken in which Gospels, and so on, and they follow those 4 lines, So, yeah, that's all. Okay.